Not only is JT Toppin pulling out of the NBA draft, but he's already announced his destination. He's headed home to Texas Tech.
You are Locked On College Basketball, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hey there, what's up? Welcome into the Locked On College Basketball Podcast, the only daily national college hoop show out there. I'm your host, Isaac Schade, joined today by our guy, Leif Thulin, who's thick in the midst of all the wild draft stuff. He's been a little bit under the weather, but he's a baller, and he's still here with us today. So, Leif, thanks for being here, even in a crazy and sick season, buddy. Good to have you. Y'all are joining us.
Happy to be here.
Oh, man, it's great. I love it. You all are joining us at the place to get your college basketball content every single day. Thanks for making this your first listen or watch. Want to remind you that you can catch every episode ad-free on Amazon Music. Special shout out to all of you everydayers out there, as well as all the members of the Locked On College Basketball Discord community. So glad to have you all here. If you're a guest joining us, welcome in. The water's fine. Coming up on the show today, as I said, we're going to talk JT Toppin. We've got a couple other odds and ends of people who are staying in the draft. Great news finally for Villanova after an offseason of quite a bit of bad news. Good news for Cincinnati. And then we're going to have a little draft profile of Reed Sheppard, who was wildly underrated in high school coming out. So we'll get to all of that. But Leif, Wednesday, today, you and I are recording around lunchtime Eastern time on Wednesday. Right about 12 hours from now is the NBA withdrawal deadline. And so excited for that. Andy and I might be going live tonight, folks, at that, or we will have a show tomorrow. Stay tuned for that. But Leif, we want to talk about some news that we learned on Tuesday. First of which is that JT Toppin not only is pulling out of the NBA draft, but in the same announcement announced that he is headed to Texas Tech. Another great get for Grant McCasland, who I thought had a great first year in Lubbock. What do you like about this for the Red Raiders, Leif?
Well, yeah, I saw him at the NBA Combine, and his first scrimmage made me think, well, maybe there's a chance, because I was pretty pessimistic about his chances of staying in the NBA draft coming into the Combine. But then at this scrimmage on Tuesday, you look up, and he was extremely productive, and despite being what I would consider undersized for the NBA at the 5, and then you say, well, can he play the 4? Like, yes, there's pessimism. He proved a few naysayers, including myself, wrong in terms of saying, well, he belonged at the level. I personally still thought he was going to come back to school, and I thought he was going to transfer up. And what I mean by transferring up, for those of you who don't know, is New Mexico was great. The Mountain West was great last year, but their schedule doesn't lend itself conducively to what the NBA really likes. They like to see you thrive against physicality and athleticism. So he goes to the Big 12 now. And that is going to be really interesting because, like you said, Grant McCasland overperformed last year, in my opinion. I think they were better than people expected, certainly better than I expected. And they kind of just lacked an athlete in the middle. Like, they had a big guy in Warren Washington who was hurt to close the year. And if he was healthy, I think they would have had a better chance of stopping a team like NC State, who obviously went on a huge run to the Final Four. I mean, that's big. Now you go for a guy in Toppin who is putting together a three-point stroke along with supreme athleticism in the landscape of college basketball. And so that makes them a lot better. And in the case of Toppin, I think it's a prudent move because I don't think even with that performance, he's going to really get drafted highly, maybe in the 50s. And next year, he's going to have more tape that could be good.
And this is a guy, I mean, I love all those points, Leif. Like, this is not only great for Texas Tech, this is great for him as a player. Let's not forget, this is a guy that is only a sophomore. He's got 3 years of eligibility left, plenty of time to prove himself. And it feels like NBA personnel are kind of letting that adage of like, we can't get old guys. Like, it feels like there's more old guys that are proving it in the NBA. And so, man, just coming back for one more year is not a bad thing. And for Texas Tech, this is the second straight year they land the Mountain West Conference Freshman of the Year. Last year, having gotten Darion Williams, who is back. He was from Nevada. And so I love this. Folks, if you don't know the numbers on Toppin for last year, again, measured, he was listed at 6'9", but at the combine measured 6'7", but has a 7-foot wingspan, allowing him to play bigger, if you'll allow me that phrase. Averaged just shy of a double-double last year, 12.4 points, 9.1 boards, 3.7 of which were offensive. as Leif said, working on putting together a 3-point shot. Leif, I want to ask you about that next. Last year shot 34.4%, but it was just 32 total attempts. So we need more of a sample size. Was not a good free throw shooter last year, 56.5%. We need to see better there and more attempts. Didn't get to the line a ton, but 65.5% from 2. So Leif, as you look at this, I know you said he's working on putting that 3-point shot together because, I mean, surely at 6'7", he just can't play 5 at the NBA like he did at New Mexico last year. I think he's a power forward in the NBA. But do you believe in what you're seeing, like fundamentally from his 3-point shot that he's working on?
Yeah, I think the touch indications were positives. Like he was able to put good rotation and the ball, like it didn't look like, hey, here's this herky jerky forced up shot. So I do think there's touch indicators. I think the big thing will be, how does he shoot free throws this year? In terms of the NBA evaluation, like, yes, you want to see how much he shoot threes, but like if I'm Grant McCasland, I probably still want him near the basket more frequently, especially because I think they're going to probably play him more minutes at the 5 than the 4. But you want to just see enough shots to believe it if you're an NBA evaluator. But from the college basketball perspective, McCasland used to be a really slow tempo guy at North Texas. Like I would see games finish at like 54-50, and you'd be like, all right, they played their game. Well,
That's right.
This past year at Texas Tech, they would score in the 80s routinely. So I think this behooves Toppin to go to a team that is kind of molding their identity to play good defense, but get out and run. And I think that's his best attribute, is the way he can run and rebound. So you're going to see this twitchiness of a guy who's undersized. And I think there are going to be some hard matchups for him in the Big 12. Being a 5 at that height, because like I said, I don't think he was close to 6'9". He was definitely 6'7" at the combine, and that looked more appropriate all season to me. But I think his speed will be rewarded in the Big 12, especially with McCasland's kind of revitalized offense.
Yeah, I mean, you think about him going up against like a Hunter Dickinson, and it's like, I don't know how that's going to go when you go to Fog Allen Fieldhouse. But they do also, Texas Tech, bring in Federico, one of my favorite names in all of college basketball. A 6'10" guy coming in from Pittsburgh that can handle some of those bigger 5s in the Big 12 and against other opponents. Leif, to that point, do you think if Toppin, I mean, because he, as you said, he's twitchy enough, he's athletic enough, if the 3-point shot develops enough for this year, do you see a world in which he could slide over and play? I know you said you expect him to play a lot at the 5, but do you see a world in which he gets a good share of minutes at the 4 as well?
Yeah, I think those two are fairly interchangeable. Federico's relatively thin. Toppin's thin in his own right, but he's kind of the more vertical athlete. So I think offensively you're going to see some interchangeability there. Defensively, I think it depends matchup. So yeah, I think he'll play enough 4, and if there's enough faith in his shot, I think he'll hoist a few up. I would expect him to shoot about 1.5 a game from 3. And we'll see if the volume says, hey, you're shooting it well enough to shoot more. But that's kind of my expectation. And it's a really good get for Texas Tech. And it was interesting because when the rumors were that he was going back, you knew he was from Texas. I kind of was wondering, okay, is he going to go to the Longhorns? Because
I thought he would. Yeah.
They've got like players there, but they're moving and losing a few others, and it made sense for a time. But this honestly has a more clear pathway to playing time and a more clearly defined role. So I think it's a good move, even if it's not as quote unquote sexy.
Yep, I'm with you, because with Texas losing Dylan DeSue, with them losing Dylan Mitchell, I was like, man, there's a spot there where Toppin could get in and do work. But yeah, lands in Lubbock, great news for the Red Raiders, who also, by the way, have landed Elijah Hawkins from Minnesota, 5'11" point guard. Kevin Overton from Drake. Remember, Coach DeVries is off to West Virginia. Overton, a 6'5" shooting guard. They bring in 2 freshmen, Christian Anderson from legendary Oak Hill Academy. He's another 5'11" point guard. And Leon Horner from there in the Dallas area, a 6'6" small forward. Leave just a couple other tidbits before we get on to some Villanova news. KJ Simpson from Colorado is staying in the draft, and as is Jonathan Mogbo from San Francisco, a big blow for the Dons and the West Coast Conference in general. And by the way, folks, if you didn't see, there was a big ongoing court case where Jordan Dingle and Chris Ledlam from St. John's were trying to get some more eligibility. That's been denied. It appears that their careers are officially done. All right, Leif. Finally, Villanova gets some good news this week. Eric Dixon's coming back. What does it mean for Kyle Neptune's team? We'll talk about that in just a second. Right after I tell you about FanDuel, it's winner take all time in the NHL, and FanDuel's giving you a shot to bring home a win of your own. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any $5 bet, any winning $5 bet, I should specify. That's $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and more. On Tuesday night, the Timberwolves avoided getting swept. We'll have game 5 on Thursday. Timberwolves favored by 4.5. We'll see if they can keep this series going or if we'll have the NBA Finals set. If you want to get in on that action, visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make every playoff shot count. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. All right, Leif, 2 different players I want to talk about here. One in the Big East returning to his school and one in the Big 12 returning to his school. We'll start with Villanova and Eric Dixon coming back. For those who haven't been keeping up with Villanova this offseason, things have not been going exactly well. TJ Bamba, Lance Ware, Brandon House, and Trey Patterson have all transferred out. Mark Armstrong is staying in the draft. Justin Moore, Tyler Burton, Hakeem Hart, Chris Archidiakono are all out of eligibility. In total, that's 9 players from last year's team gone. And then there was the big news last week that Max Shulga, who had committed to come from VCU, was actually decommitting and staying at VCU. So you lose those 9. Shulga's not coming. Finally, on Tuesday, we got the news that Eric Dixon is pulling out and staying at Villanova. This is going to be his 6th year, Leif, of college, redshirted his first year at Villanova, and this will be year 6 using that COVID eligibility. I know Villanova was not great, but they are getting back their leading scorer, 16.6 points a game from Eric Dixon. Leif Thulin, what does this mean to you for Villanova upcoming?
Oh, it's everything. He's their best player from the last season, and he's been extremely consistent in terms of growth as a player. Like initially when Dixon was there, he played, and they made the Final Four in 2022, and he was a sophomore, I believe, a redshirt sophomore, and he got the ball sparingly, would hit open shots, and he was kind of a dare shooter, would defend, very fundamental in terms of, hey, I'm going to box out, I'm going to jump stop, I'm going to do everything Jay Wright says, but they had every other player on the team with a larger role. And then his role has grown progressively. Like he's the stereotypical, like 4-year, I guess in this case, 5-year guy that has grown each year for a program. And unfortunately for him, the coach has changed. And obviously the coach that was there was excellent. And then obviously Neptune had huge boots to fill. But it's been a kind of a underwhelming start for a guy in Kyle Neptune. But yeah, I think Eric Dixon realized, look, I'm going to probably get a lot of money from Villanova. I'm also going to be very productive and maybe help my stock because this year our team wasn't very good. It can't really get too much worse, and I'm going to help myself out. And I don't think his NBA stock was all that great considering the way that Villanova played. So this one I kind of expected, but there was a little bit of doubt that started to creep in because Nova was losing everyone, like you said. And it's like, okay, does Nova's best player really want to go back if like his teammates that he's been with for years don't? And I'm glad because basketball is better when Villanova is good.
Yeah.
And when they're actually playing well. And there was times last year even where they did. Eric Dixon was the reason for it. And I think this is a good start to kind of revitalize that program.
Yeah, I mean, I see a very real world in which Kyle Neptune this year just has to say, all right, Eric, look, I need 20 a night from you, dude. Like, let's just center everything around. And I know that's not necessarily historically Villanova basketball where it is more of a we're all in and everybody is able to contribute. But sometimes you just got to circle the wagons and recognize you got a superstar and go to him. Like I remember watching multiple Villanova games last year where because this dude not only is 6'80", but he's 260, he just bullies dudes in the post, will abuse, smaller power forwards or because they were severely undersized last year, Villanova was. And so we had to play so much 5 and would be able to, out athlete some of those guys at times. And so Leif, because this also comes with some good news that Fresno State big man Enoch Boyake, 6'10", comes in as well. And maybe, we just talked about the Texas Tech front court, maybe we got a situation here where this allows Dixon to actually slide back to his more normal or comfortable or typical power forward slot. Would that better some of those NBA prospects and Villanova's prospects next year?
I think it would better the NBA prospects. As for Nova, I think it really depends on who the guards are to help create, because Dixon, at least when he plays the 4, like you said, he kind of posts up and creates advantages. But if the 5 doesn't shoot, like they ran into at times last year, even when he was the 5 and he was the 5, and I mean the 4 in this case wouldn't shoot, and Burton's shot abandoned him from what it was at Richmond, it becomes harder. So I think Dixon's a really good shooter. So if Boyake plays the 5 and Dixon gets the space of the floor at the 4, that's fine. But it almost is backwards. You'd rather have Dixon in the post than if he's playing the 4, because you'd have a smaller player defending him. So I actually would rather have Dixon play the 5 for Villanova if I'm looking to win those basketball games.
Yeah.
But for an NBA prospect, maybe that's something Dixon said, like, hey, I need to play the 4 because that's the feedback he got. And I'm not saying I know that, but I assume that is the feedback he got.
Yeah, that's a good point. Like, you got to figure out where is our biggest advantage. And if that biggest advantage is allowing Dixon to go to work in the paint, can we find a stretch 5 that allows him to play the 4 and both play in and out? That would be really interesting. Let's be honest, for Kyle Neptune's job, this needs to be a really good year at Villanova, Leif. So we're going to keep our eyes on that. Let's transition to Cincinnati, where they get the news that Aziz Bandaogo is pulling out of the draft to come back. Leif, if Eric Dixon was expected to come back, this was all the more so expected, at least in my opinion. But you never know until it actually happens what's going to happen. And Leif, what I want to say for this specific situation is, given all that two-time transfer stuff last year and Bandaogo not being able to play for so long, this just feels right for him to get a full year at Cincinnati to really prove himself. Because the year before at Utah Valley, he had averaged a double-double, 11.5 points, 10.4 boards, 2.9 blocks, Leif. Didn't quite have those numbers at Cincinnati last year, 6.6 points, 7.4 rebounds, 1.7 blocks. But I got to expect, knowing that the eligibility is there, knowing you got a full offseason, knowing you're going to be able to go, and this Cincinnati team should be good, I expect those numbers to kind of pop back up towards those Utah Valley levels. Agree or disagree?
Agree in terms of pointing back in that direction. I don't know if he quite gets to that level of productivity, because I think Cincinnati actually last year for much of the year was pretty competitive. Like, they're going to be in the Big 12, and that's a league where typically transferring up's not going to go all that great for you. And I think Toppin may be an exception because they're going to play fast and he's going to score.
Yeah.
But most of the time, you're not going to exceed expectations at that level. I mean, Bandaogo was paid $1 million from UVU. Like, the deepest college basketball fans knew of him, but that's very few and far between at UVU. And then he goes to Cincinnati, and like you said, didn't get to play a ton. So I think it's enormous that he comes back. Like, I fully expected him to come back. But he's got a lot of traits that people would look for in terms of NBA evaluations, but he didn't get to show any of it because he was out of rhythm much of the year at Cincinnati. Yeah. So this will be the chance to demonstrate why he was paid such a handsome check in going to the Bearcats. And I think the Bearcats are a team that could crack the NCAA tournament. I think they're probably a touch outside looking in, but I liked the immediate growth that they had. And, I had faith in that program from watching them transition in the Big 12. Obviously, BYU was the one that exceeded expectations enormously, but I was pretty darn impressed by Cincinnati and the way they competed against some of the upper echelon of the best conference in basketball. So I think Bandaogo is probably going to get you 14-8, and I think that's pretty good. Like, that's really good. But I don't know how efficient that 14-8 is as compared to what he did at UVU.
I like those numbers, Leif. Yeah, he might not get back to double-double status, but it's like in total, you add points and rebounds and it's 20, if you'll go with me on that, right? Like, I like that. We already talked about Dylan Mitchell earlier in the show. He transfers in from Texas. It's a great front court, along with getting some depth. Arrington Page coming over from USC, incoming freshman Tyler McKinley, a 6'8" power forward, number 78 in the class. So they're going to have a versatile and somewhat deep front court. What worries me a little bit, though, Leif, is about shooting and spacing with this front court. Dylan Mitchell has made as many threes as you and I have at the Division I level, right? And so what does that tell you about this front court and how they might succeed this year for Wes Miller?
I mean, that's a really good point. I think they're buying into athleticism and defense more than their concern is regarding shooting. They're going to need some tremendous shooting from their backcourt in order to stay with kind of what college basketball is transitioning into, where shooting and versatility of the front court matters. Defensive versatility, they've got it in spades in the front court. Mitchell, tremendous athlete. You talk about Page, pretty darn good athlete. Bandaogo, really good athlete. So they're going to be able to be switchable, run, push the floor, but they need to shoot from the backcourt. So yeah, I don't think they're going to shoot well. I don't think you can just say, oh, well, you know what? Now you're on a different setting. Let's make some threes. But I do think they're going to find ways to manufacture points, turning defense into offense.
All right. We'll keep our eyes on, man, the Big 12, Leif, just reloading. It's going to be really interesting. We, in the lead up to the NBA draft, always like to get a little bit of a draft profile when we have Leif on. And so today, little Reed Sheppard action, who started a grand total of 5 games at Kentucky last year. I don't understand what Coach Cal was doing. In fact, he could be picked higher than the number of games he started in Lexington. We'll get a little update on Reed Sheppard. All that coming up in just a second. Today's draft profile is Reed Sheppard, a freshman out of Kentucky, measured at the combine 6'1" and 3/4 with no shoes, 181.6 pounds. He must have had a little bit heavy lunch that day and that 0.6 pounds. Wingspan 6'3" and 1/4. Leif, but before I even ask you about draft stuff, why do you think that college recruiters, missed on Reed Sheppard? And it's not like he was egregiously low ranked, other than at 247, who had him 79th. But he was in the 20s at the other 3 recruiting sites, but clearly should have been much higher than that. Why do you think they missed?
So the reason I think they missed is because you knew who he was going in all along in terms of his father and mother played at Kentucky, and his play did not demonstrate like the flair you typically see with a player whose parents were collegiate athletes. Like his play was heady and well executed, and then you saw, okay, run out dunks, and you saw he could shoot the ball, but his shooting numbers were, even in high school, were nowhere near what they were at Kentucky. Yeah. So like that wasn't as egregious of a miss, because if he was shooting 52% from 3 in high school and in the AAU circuit, then you feel pretty dumb. But he wasn't shooting that well. So that's, I'll give some excuse there. But I do think he was underranked because a lot of like AAU circuits, and you don't get to see the intangibles that Reed Sheppard got to demonstrate, that had so many people in love with the way he played basketball. And so that's probably why they missed. I do think he was too low. And I won't pretend that I watched a ton of him in high school. But what I will say is he was someone that clearly knew how to play basketball. And sometimes those type of players don't get as much, like, hey, this guy's going to learn to play basketball. And you can see the unbelievable athleticism, and that type of thing gets more prioritized than what seems to be deemed as more of a finished product heading into college. And clearly he wasn't a finished product. Like he accelerated his shooting numbers, showed more defensive acumen than people knew, and then showed incredible athleticism at the combine. Like I watched him do the vertical jump. I wonder if he kind of short-armed the standing reach in order to get that 42, because I watched a ton of people jump, and I wasn't sure that was the highest I saw, but nonetheless, he really soared. Like, I'm not trying to take away from that, but he jumped really well, and now the question is, can he play point guard at the NBA level? Because that elevates his stock more than if he's a smaller 2-guard.
Okay, well, Leif, answer your own question. Can he play point guard at the NBA level?
Well, I think he will. I don't think he's as natural of a point guard as I would be comfortable drafting as high as like top 5, like I've seen in some mocks. I have him 9th on my board. I've been lower on him because I think a lot of the appeal of defense, like you see him compared to Derek White. Derek White's a point of attack defender. Reed Sheppard's more of like an anticipatory, get in the passing lane, get his hand on shots from behind type of defender. And so I don't have as much two-way belief. But what I do believe is he'll be able to shoot. And I think he's got the headiness in order to come off screens and create for others. But I just don't think you've seen as much of a sample size of him running pick and roll as I would be comfortable to turn the franchise over at the point guard position to someone like him. But in this class, you're looking more for a player to build around, a player to build with rather than a player to build around. And he's certainly a player you can make useful. Like he can knock down open shots at the very least if he's playing off the ball at a very high clip. And then if he can develop into a point guard, I think you can have a player who's solid and steady. And we've seen in these playoffs, like steady players have really been helpful. And I'm not going to compare him to Nembhard. I don't think they're the same player. But Nembhard, for much of his career, has been a backup that you see score occasionally in the second unit, make good plays. Well, why can't he do something similar than that, but be 4 years younger when he's coming out? I mean, obviously McConnell, because they're of the same race, like that's going to be something that he's compared to. Another guy that I've likened him to a little bit is he plays similarly to me as Peyton Pritchard, someone who's not going to beat you with speed or athleticism, despite having good speed, has a really good handle, knocks down open shots, isn't going to play a ton on the ball in a great team. But if you put him on a worse team, he could really thrive with the ball in his hands. And I think he's probably a better prospect than what Pritchard has turned out as a player. But Pritchard's still a really solid player. He's one of the 8 players that play on the team that's been the best all season long in the NBA.
Yeah, I mean, there's something to that. Leif, I'm curious, a lot of people look at Reed Sheppard's numbers from last year and like, this dude not only shot 52% from 3 on 4.4 attempts, but he got 4 rebounds a game. He had 4.5 assists a game, and he had 2.5 steals a game. So with the steals, and we talked about the perhaps not having as much two-way acumen as he did at the collegiate level. Do you think that is some of that, maybe just not the wingspan, or what is it that doesn't translate as well to you from a two-way status?
Well, I would say when you watch him defend as the primary defender, I don't think he was particularly great. And in the NBA, they hunt mismatches.
Yep.
So if you've got a guy playing the 2 guard, for instance, that's 6'1" and change without shoes, and I understand that turns into like 6'3", but that's still undersized for a 2 guard. And with not a overwhelming wingspan or physicality with which they defend. And like I said, he's got great hands and anticipation, but it doesn't really matter that much if you're on the ball. Like there's not very many good 6'3" defenders in the NBA, including the very best. Like those guys are anomalies. So if you're going to take a guy who's better off of the ball to play as an off-ball guard and defend, well, you're not going to be able to demonstrate your off-ball capacities because you're going to be switched onto the ball all the time. Yeah. So that's why I would say, more of a pessimistic approach to his defense. Makes sense. But I believe in the offense. I just don't think I'm comfortable saying I believe in the offense so much that he's the point guard of the future when he hasn't really played point guard to take him within the top 5. I think he's projectable enough that he'll be an effective offensive player that you probably still want to take him in the top 10. Whereas guys like Cody Williams or Matas Buzelis, who have maybe more potential, really struggled and shot terribly at the combine. And you're like, okay, well, what are they going to do immediately? Because immediate returns are kind of becoming more and more important with the CBA in the NBA. It's making, you can't pay these guys. So if you get someone good and they're able to contribute early, it means more and more. So Sheppard, I think because of that, is going to be a beneficiary. But I think you're going to have to take a leap of faith about him running your offense. And I think some team will. And I'd imagine he's going to go in the top 7. I have him 9th. But those are the reasons I think it's a little bit of a projection more so than a certainty.
Interesting. All right. So it sounds like Reed Sheppard, guaranteed lottery pick, and maybe, quite certainly top 10 as well. We'll see if he can sneak into that top 5. It's probably going to depend on what a team needs or sees in him. And because of his knowledge and understanding of the game, his ability to step in and help at least in some roles right away. Leif, great breakdown as always there. Leif, anything else you want to get in on Reed Sheppard before we get out of here?
No, I mean, I imagine he'll be one of the top 3 shooters from this class. I really like Dalton Connect as one of the shooters. Sanford and Shireman are probably the other guys that can really shoot the basketball. So I'm not to say he's not worth picking in the top 10. I just would caution you to believe in the upside that I see. And unless he finds a role that he kind of uses him as, hey, you're the guy who brings the ball up, and then you're going to run around and use your gravity as a shooter, which I don't deem to be a point guard. So I think it's going to be an interesting way. It depends the team a lot for him on how effective of a point guard he is as a true creator and facilitator, because most of the time at Kentucky, it was Rob Dillingham. And so it scares me to draft a player to play a position that they did not play in college. And I know Kentucky has a track record of guards turning out no matter what they do, but typically they play the same position that they did in college.
All right. So we'll see what happens with Reed Sheppard. Draft night coming up. We're about a month away here. Going to be some really good stuff. Leif Thulin, thanks for joining me as always. Thanks for seeing it through with your cough and everything you got, man. Really appreciate it. Way to use that mute button like a boss. Folks, thanks so much for joining us today. It was a great show. Going to have obviously a lot more of draft decisions throughout the day on Wednesday, and we will have those for you on tomorrow's show, maybe even a late night live tonight. If you're not subscribed to the show, you want to do that, so you make sure to tune in when we have shows like that. If you haven't hit the bell to get notifications when we go live or a premiere's coming, make sure you hit that as well. If you're not part of the Locked On College Basketball Discord community, you're missing out, and we'd love to have you. The link's in the show notes, and it's free to join. As always, apologies to the lawyer family. Let's go Wildcats, and until tomorrow, peace.